Greetings, welcome to Facts About Everything. Let's first look at Andrew Johnson. He was drunk at Lincoln's second inauguration. One senator said, "The inauguration went off very well, except that the vice president-elect was too drunk to perform his duties and disgraced himself and the Senate by making a drunken, foolish speech. I was never so mortified in my life. Had I been able to find a hole, I would have dropped through it out of sight." He had pet mice which he kept in his bedroom. He never went to school and could barely read or use math until he was 17. He once said, "The goal to strive for is a poor government but a rich people." He used to be a tailor and was nicknamed the Tennessee Tailor. He was the youngest president to marry. He was only 18 when he married 16-year-old Eliza Johnson. He did not agree with the releasing of slaves and had his own slave called Sam. He is the first vice president to replace an assassinated president. He is considered to be one of the worst presidents ever, mainly for refusing to agree to the promised rights for African Americans. Johnson was at Lincoln's deathbed. He looked at Abe and said, "They shall suffer for this. They shall suffer for this." He died after suffering 2 strokes. He was buried with his body wrapped within the American flag and a well-worn copy of the Constitution as his pillow. His final words were, "Oh, do not cry, be good children, and we shall meet in heaven." Let's look at the 18th president, Ulysses S. Grant. Is it Ulysses or Ulysses? I don't know. If you think Ulysses is an odd name, his birth name was Hiram. Or Hiram. I can't pronounce anything to do with this guy. Some sources say the S in his name stood for Simpson. It didn't. The S in his name didn't stand for anything. His nickname was Unconditional Surrender Grant. He once said, "My failures have been errors in judgment, not of intent." Grant was invited by Abraham Lincoln to the Ford Theater on the night of Lincoln's assassination. At the last minute, Ulysses decided to visit his children with his wife that day. He is the last president to own a slave. He was the first president to have his parents present when he was sworn in as president. He was an avid animal lover. His horses were called Butcher Boy, Egypt, Jeff Davis, Jenna, Julia, Mary, St. Louis, and Cincinnatus. He also had ponies called Reb and Billy Button and a dog called Faithful. Grant was arrested while he was president for speeding on a horse. He was fined $20. He was the most heavy drinking president in American history. Reports from the Civil War battle said he could sit and drink all day. Although he was in many battles, he suffered from hemophobia, a fear of blood. His phobia was so severe that even rare steak made him feel ill, and he would cook meat until it was practically burnt. Grant was so shy about his body that he refused to shower or change in front of other men. This might sound like a common fear, but this was when he was in the war with thousands of soldiers. Grant refused to change in front of them and would change in a private tent. Many people get nervous just before their wedding. I didn't, I was strong for the team. But Grant suffered marriage anxiety even when he was not the one getting married. He suffered such a horrific panic attack at his daughter's wedding that he hid in a room and cried. Grant was the first president to do many things. He was the first to see the Pacific Ocean, meet the Queen of England, visit the Vatican, Russia, Asia, Egypt, Japan, Hawaii, see the Great Wall of China, host an Indian chief in the White House, host black leaders in the White House, including Frederick Douglass, and use a vacation home. Grant smoked up to 20 cigars a day. Throughout his presidency, he was gifted with 20,000 cigars. Unsurprisingly, this led to him dying of cancer. Okay, this next fact I'm going to say, I actually think is the most unbelievable fact about all American presidents. Grant is the only American president to ever die from cancer. Considering cancer kills about 1 in 2 people or 1 in 3 people, that's absolutely insane. The last thing he ever said was water. Because he couldn't speak much on his deathbed, his final words were written down. He wrote, "There was never one more willing to go than I am." I just found out that there's a website that just says the final words to every president. I was like, that's not how I research these. I had to look for each one individually. That took ages. I should have done that. That would have been way faster. Rutherford B. Hayes was the 19th president. Hayes had the first Easter egg roll on the White House lawn. This tradition stands today on the first Monday after Easter. It was the greatest thing he ever did during his presidency. He was the first president to use a telephone while in office. It was installed in 1879 by Alexander Graham Bell. Notice how I didn't say the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, because he didn't invent it. If you want to know more about that, check out my misconceptions video on inventions. He is one of the 5 presidents to serve in the Civil War. He was also the only president to be wounded in the Civil War. He was wounded on 4 separate occasions and had 4 horses shot from under him. He was the first president to visit the West Coast while in office. He traveled to San Francisco on September the 8th, 1880. His middle name was Burchard. He signed legislation that allowed women to plead cases in the Supreme Court. It was the first time that women were allowed in the courtroom. He had 8 dogs and 3 cats. His dogs were called Dot, Hector, Duke, Grim, Otis, Juno, Shep, and Jet. His cats were called Siam, Pussy, that's the only picture I'm going to show, and Piccolomini. Rutherford won the electoral vote as presidency by a single vote. He was sworn in secretly because the Republicans were worried that the opposing party would tarnish his inauguration. His victory was so controversial it nearly started a second civil war. He wasn't even allowed to be sworn into office in public in case he was assassinated, so it was done within the White House. His election is still contested to this day. His rival for the presidency was Samuel J. Tilden. He won almost 250,000 more votes than Hayes, along with 19 more electoral college votes. The opposing parties called him Rutherford and his fraudulency. When Tilden and Hayes saw the election results, they both assumed they won and they threw their own victory parties. When Hayes' presidency was contested, he believed he could prove he won by simply counting the votes. This was made impossible since 3 states refused to declare who received the most votes. Weirdly, Hayes didn't vote for himself. His wife Lucy banned alcohol in the White House. She got the nickname Lemonade Lucy. Rutherford wanted to extend the 4-year term to 6 years. Rutherford always intended to run for a single term. Rutherford banned card playing in the White House. One of his most famous quotes is, "To vote is like the payment of a debt, a duty never to be neglected, if its performance is possible." His biographer was Ari Hugenboom. He said that Rutherford's greatest accomplishment was rebuilding trust in the presidency after the assassination of Lincoln's death. He died from a heart attack. His final words were, "I know that I'm going where Lucy is." James A. Garfield was the 20th President of the United States. He said, "Ideas are the great warriors of the world, and a war that has no idea behind it is simply a brutality." He worked on the Ohio canals as a young man and was known as Boatman Jim. All of my friends who watch this video are now going to start calling me Boatman Jim. I walked into that one. Although he could use both hands to write, he usually used his left hand. This makes him the first left-handed president as well as the first ambidextrous president. He could write in 2 languages at the same time. Due to being ambidextrous, he would write Latin with one hand and Greek with the other. Better still, he could do this without looking. He used to be a minister of the Christian church. He is the only president that used to be a preacher. He was the last president to be born in a log cabin. His middle name was Abram. He was the first president to campaign in multiple languages. He could speak German to the German Americans he met during his campaign. He had a horse called Kit and a dog called Vito. He was obsessed with triangles, trapezoids, and Pythagoras' theorem, but who isn't? Come on. He was the poorest man to ever become president. He was an excellent juggler and would juggle clubs that were shaped like bowling pins. He is the first person in American history to be a United States representative, a Senate-elect, and a president-elect simultaneously. When Garfield was shot by Charles J. Gatto, Alexander Graham Bell tried to locate the bullet with a metal detector. The detector didn't work, and Garfield died. Way to go, Bell. He is the second president to be assassinated. His final words were, "Can't you stop the pain?" You can, by dying. Personal thank you to these fine people for all their help. Thanks for watching, see you again.